I don't dream much anymore. When I do, it isn't like I used to. Instead, whatever melancholy I might have conjured up is replaced with screams of strangers, with horrid imagery. I would like to tell myself it came from a dream. We've been home for some time now, Sarah and I, trying to reconcile whatever is left of the life we once led. I'm not really sure it's even possible to go back to normal after experiencing what we went through together, what some of those close to us never even survived. I wish others who made it came forward, but the truth is, each time I go further into this chronicle, I feel more anxious and afraid. The danger isn't past. I'm not sure it ever will be. The night trapped in the conference room stretched on for hours, with both of us barely gaining any sleep despite our weary muscles. The sounds of abominations crawling amid the halls was enough to keep us from ever fully falling asleep. I think we both were afraid that if we did pass out, we might never wake up. Eventually, though, the noise died down. A quiet and eerie calm covered the surrounding staterooms. It was time for us to survey the damage. You can try to prepare for something like that. Some soldiers say it's simply a matter of being able to compartmentalize the pain and suffering you see. I don't know if they receive any kind of training to do that, but Sarah and I were merely walking into a genocide blind. Right out of the door was the first signs of destruction. 2 severed bodies torn apart at the neck and split open right down the torso, their innards dangling out and stinking up everything. And down the darkened corridor, it was easy to see more of the same. Long streaks of blood smeared the walls and floor. Bodies were sprawled out or shoved against the walls as though discarded. I don't understand. They aren't using them for food, just for carnage, Declan said as we struggled to move past the first collection of corpses to the stairwell. Sarah kept her hand on her mouth as we walked up, and I was reminded of the gruesome imagery from the sister ship. Stacks of men and women were spread about the surrounding tanning area. No rhyme or reason for any of their deaths. It didn't get much better from there. Besides the usual visceral horror we were now seeing, other bodies seemed to have vats of disgusting slime pooling from their cavities, like the creatures had used them as breeding grounds for something. One in the group found their husband, his skull completely split open and then hollowed out to resemble a honeycomb pattern. It even appeared there were tiny, strange, 6-legged creatures skittering about in the crevices of his head. "All of the boats on this deck are gone," Lincoln announced after we finished our first sweep. That only made sense given what panic likely had swept across the entire ship. Anyone being attacked would do whatever they could to escape. "Then we go from here until we find something else," Isaac said. That mysterious silky substance Craig and I had seen so much of was also starting to make its presence known aboard our ship, sliding and oozing its way into small corners of the floor as we moved toward L-Deck.
"How many of us do you think are left?"
Holly asked, her eyes focusing on each body, hoping to God she didn't see Thomas amongst the dead. I recognized the mangled mess of one body as being a member of the security detachment, and it got me thinking. "We need to get to the armory, keep ourselves protected," I said. There was no telling if the indescribable creatures might strike again. The others were in agreement, so our small group moved toward the next few floors, observing more carnage as we went. We were about halfway there, maybe a little more, when a gunshot echoed through the thick fog in front of us. "We're from the lower deck!" Isaac shouted. He raised his hands up to show that we weren't holding any weapons of our own. Another warning shot told him not to step any further.
"All of you get down on your knees. Hands behind your head."
A stern female voice called out. I tugged Sarah to the floorboard to obey, watching as several passengers emerged from the fog, carrying weapons they had likely stolen off the corpses. The leader, a young woman with purple-dyed hair, aimed a military-grade rifle right at Isaac and snapped,
"If any of you move, I will put a bullet in this man's head."
The rest of us fearfully complied as she ordered one of the men to search us for weapons.
"Please, we mean no harm."
Holly stammered. "Shut up!" One guy barked, kicking her a little with the butt of his gun. "Looks like they're clean," he added as he marched back over to the woman. She knelt down to my eye level, quickly checking my irises and then those of my wife.
"Looks like they're clean,"
she muttered.
"Who are you?"
Sarah asked.
"Jasmine. And this is Chuck, Sean, and Waylon."
"There was no need for that roughness. We meant no harm," Isaac said as she allowed us to stand back up. You say that, but the past few hours, I've seen grown men tear each other limb from limb. Chuck remarked evenly. The creatures, what are they? Where did they go? Craig said.
Good question.
Jasmine agreed as she pointed toward the next level we had just climbed up from.
I take it there aren't lifeboats below either?
I shook my head fractionally. Damn it, we need to find the inflatables, Waylon said.
Let us help. We want off this ship as bad as you do.
My wife begged. Jasmine nodded in agreement, then guided our group through the next deck. We had to have seen at least 300 bodies by then. We were on our way to the armory. Do you happen to know where that is? Isaac muttered. The newcomers didn't respond, and I could see why. They wanted to keep the status quo with them in charge, but they still hadn't explained why they were so fearful of their fellow passengers. I wish it had simply been that they were being precautious. But less than a half hour later on G-Deck, we learned of another threat. The group had been moving as quickly as possible, checking for survivors and supplies as we went. Every once in a while, we heard the same low droning, and it made us hide inside for a few moments, all of us scared stiff of the chance that the unseen beast might return. Then from amid the fog, Holly saw her husband.
Thomas! Oh, thank God!
She screamed, running down the side of the boat where he seemed to be wandering aimlessly.
Hold on!
Jasmine yelled. The young woman held the rest of us back, and Chuck and Sean aimed their weapons, focusing straight on Thomas as we slowly walked forward. What's gotten into you? Are you going to shoot an unarmed man? I asked. I even mustered up enough courage to try and struggle with Jack for control of the gun.
That's no man.
Jasmine whispered. Those simple words were enough for me to pause and look towards Holly's would-be reunion.
Where were you? I've been so worried,
she said, sobbing gently and then grabbing his neck and hugging him. Thomas didn't say a word. He just gently rubbed the back of her head and whispered in her ear. It looked every bit like the reunion we expected.
Thomas, what are you talking about?
Holly said softly, looking at her husband in confusion. I could hardly see the outline of his body frame, but one thing stood out. His eyes were a pure, dingy yellow. He squeezed his wife's hand hard, smiling in a twisted sort of way. Then suddenly he grabbed the back of her neck and pulled her hard to the side of the rails. Sarah screamed and watched as they plummeted to the ocean with a resounding crash. Jasmine's men trailed the water, searching for any sign of them. The waves crashed gently against the sister ship. Then from the depths, I saw Thomas crawling up the side of the dead ship, using his bare hands to climb that sheet metal, making dents in the hull to act as footholds. We could hardly even see where he crawled away to on the opposite ship, but for a brief moment, I swear to you that he looked straight toward us. It was only further confirmation that whatever had taken him over was no longer a man. He had a look that told me there was no soul inside his body. Chuck instinctively fired out, but Thomas disappeared amid the fog again, and I was left with questions that fell from my mouth like a babbling brook. What was that? What is happening? I screamed as Jasmine led us toward the next deck, and we found a wide entertainment room to hide in and gather our thoughts. When we managed to start fighting back, there were 11 of us, Waylon said, gesturing to the small group.
The others were taken over by the madness. It ruined their very spirit.
Jasmine whispered. Taken over, like demonic possession? Lincoln whispered. I don't know what you want to call it. They all saw something amid the mist, and the moment they laid their eyes on it, they went insane. Started attacking us, screaming. Every last bit of their humanity was gone in a second, Chuck responded. The survivors from my group looked at each other nervously, the dread we felt only becoming stronger as we moved toward the upper deck again once the noise was past. We were almost toward the front of the boat, where the massive open-air pool stank of death. I peered off the side of the liner to try to get a look into the fog myself. Then Isaac grabbed me back and snapped angrily. What's gotten into you? Didn't you hear what they said? I remember feeling a bit dizzy. My wife was looking at me worriedly, but I didn't understand why I felt so compelled to look. It was like something else was controlling my body. Isaac and Bonnie made a decision that we should all find shelter and then search for inflatables that evening.
We also need food,
Jasmine agreed. Some in the group weren't listening, though. Something amid the fog had caught their eye. Craig and Declan were staring out toward the edge of the ship, looking about as dazed and confused as I probably had a moment before. I remember that Isaac managed to snap them out of it, and we all reconvened in the nearby dining hall, but the men were not the same after that moment. I knew they had seen what I had not, the powerful force that Jasmine had warned us about. I've had so many dreams about it since then, this unspeakable force I was drawn to. In some, it takes the shape of this massive white rigid horn rising above the ocean waves. In others, it's a dark, sprawling tree. I have no idea if either of those are accurate, but I can safely say that it does influence people, and I saw it firsthand. It occurred a few hours later, as we gathered for a meal, and Jasmine and Isaac agreed the dining compartment would be good for a camp, until we decided the safest way to search for inflatables. Bonnie and a few other women amongst our ragtag group went to the kitchen to prepare a meal, something all of us desperately needed. I wasn't entirely sure I could eat though, given everything that I had seen that day, but somehow I managed to stomach a few bites. Craig, on the other hand, was devouring the food presented like he'd never eaten a day in his life. It was actually disturbing to watch him gore himself. Then he did something even more shocking once his plate was empty, examining them like they were new to him, and began to slam them into his face repeatedly.
Jesus Christ!
I heard another woman scream out. Isaac and I jumped up to grab him and pin him down before he did any more damage. Then Declan began to do the same, self-mutilating himself with the eating utensils. Sarah was trying her best to stop him, but he had already effectively ruined his left eye. I couldn't hold Craig down much longer as he did the same, refusing to stop as his face bled profusely. Others were joining to help us, and then we heard the sickening sound of bones crunching outside. Chuck raced to the door to look. I managed to knock Craig unconscious to get a look myself. People were jumping from somewhere above us, standing on the edge of the railing and then falling downward haphazardly. I couldn't tell much about the passengers who were committing this suicide pact, but one thing was for sure. All of them were smiling.